Hi, my name is Chris, or CJE1985 on the Mousedroid Builders forums, and now I'm going to show you how to tune your Shadow code to work better with your Mousedroid. So this is going to require a couple of kind of small changes as you look through the code base, and this will be different for every single RC car, whether or not you're using a Traxxas Bandit or using an RJ Legends kind of speed car, or any other variations of a Mousedroid that you can use for the base car. Every single one will be different. I've put in some kind of defaults here in the code, but this is all stuff that you'll have to play around with. So the first thing that we come up to is the joystick dead zone range. Just to explain what this is, so on your PS3 Move controller, the joystick that's right at the very top of the controller, this is controlling how big of a band is not going to be registered by the code. So the PS3 Move controllers all have very different sensitivity ranges. I've found that 5 kind of works best for most of the controllers I personally own. I own probably 10 or 15 of these controllers at this point. 5, it kind of gives me a good starting point. So you might not have to play around with that too much. It's just something to kind of pay attention to, that when you're don't have your thumb or whatever on the joystick, if it starts trying to move by itself, you might want to play around with this joystick dead zone range. So the next one that you're definitely going to have to play around with is the steering neutral. And so in order to adjust the steering neutral, this is the process in which I go to. And so I'll hook up the Uno, I'll hook it all up to my Mousedroid, and then I will turn on my Uno and make sure that my speed controller, which is what drives the motor in the back, is all turned on and ready to go. If I just turn it on and do not turn on my PS3 Move controller, I'm looking for a couple different things. One is I'm kind of listening to see if there's any buzzing. You'll actually, if you've kind of hooked it up before and didn't have your PS3 Move controller turned on, you'll notice that it kind of takes a couple seconds and all of a sudden you'll hear like the servo kind of straighten out, and you might hear a little bit of buzzing. So that's what you're kind of looking for setting these values up. So the steering neutral is making sure that we know what straight is from the servo and how it controls your front wheels. So you might have to move this by a couple percentage points or a couple points up or down. This is measured in degrees, so 90 degrees means it's straight on, 180 means that it's full right, 0 means it's full left. So that's what things kind of look like here. So you might have to move this up or down a couple points to make sure that it's actually centered. And so I normally just test this to be able to make sure that when I turn on the Mousedroid without my PS3 Move controller turned on, that it's actually going straight. So the next one is reverse steering. So in the default code, this is actually uncommented because most servos are mounted in such a way that the 0 and 180 degree points are actually different than what they should be from a programmatic standpoint. If you notice that when you're trying to drive your Mousedroid that that the left and right are backwards, what you would have to do is you comment this code. In order to be able to comment this code, just go in there and you type in 2 forward slashes. This line is now commented, you save it, you compile it, you upload it, and now your steering control should be going the right way. What I found is most RC cars actually have reverse steering. So we'll just go ahead and leave that uncommented. The next two control the endpoints. So when you go full left or full right, what values does the code actually use to be able to signal both of those points? And so this is an essence of trial and error. So you can start with my defaults of 0 and 120. What you do is you go ahead and flash the code onto your Arduino, you turn on your PS3 Move controller, and you try to move the joystick into the far left position. You're looking to make sure that none of the servo isn't binding, you're not hearing an excessive amount of whine from the servo, because you should be able to hear it, that it will sound really bad if you're really hitting on it. If you're really hitting on it, whatever, you need to kind of back this up a little bit, so to move this down below 180. So if it's really binding at 120, you might want to try going to like 115, and you want to have this be the highest value you can while still not having anything bind. You don't want to go beyond 180. The code will just automatically make it be 180 degrees because that's all the servo can actually do. So that's how you do this. So right and left, it's 0 or 180. So if you need to make it narrower on the left, what you do is you maybe try 5 instead of 0. That's kind of where you would set these things up for that. So that's just an effort of trial and error. These values work for my mouse droid and what I have here as I'm developing the code. So the next 3 are all about the actual drive motor in your servo. This is what provides the forward momentum. So instead of dealing with the servo, we're now talking about a speed controller. And so the first one we have is drive neutral. So again, how I test this is to be able to make sure that without turning on my PS3 Move controller, I just turn on the Arduino and have everything initialized and say, is my mouse droid trying to creep forward or creep backward when I don't even have the PS3 Move controller turned on? If that's happening, then you kind of need to move this around just a little bit. This is a much finer point. You want to move these by literally 1 or 2 up or down, not big swings like I was doing with the endpoints of moving them by 5. Because it's a very precise kind of thing here with the electronic speed controller. They're very well tuned, unlike servos who kind of drift around a little bit. So you also want to make sure that you don't hear any whine from the motor while it's in this position. Because if you hear it whining, then it is trying to move it forward. It just doesn't have enough torque or whatever to actually move it forward or backwards. So you want to set this to a value that your mouse droid is very quiet when there's nothing really kind of going on with it. So the next one is the max forward speed. Just like with steering, that we have a range from 0 to 180, we have that same range when we're talking about the electronic speed controller. 90 up to 180 is forward, and from 89 to 0 is reverse. And so we want to kind of set these values up so then we can have the maximum speeds we want to be able to go forward or backwards. Remember, this is a prop. You don't need to have this thing trying to win any speed awards. So you don't need a maximum top speed because you're probably going to lose your greeblies while you're driving around. So you need to set this to be something respectable, but you also want to be fast enough that it keeps up with you while you walk. These are the values that work best for my droid, but you can move these around if you need to. So there's 2 more. There's a couple more things I want to show you here. There's a shadow debug and a shadow verbose. I always have shadow verbose turned on in the code. Shadow debug only kind of works for the Mega 80Ks. This reports back a lot of information into the serial monitor. I do have a Mega 80K. I do this when I'm doing some debugging inside the code where I need to see a lot of information so I can see all the stick positions as the code is running inside my serial monitor so I can figure out what might be going on. If you're just using this on an Uno, you're not going to be able to turn on shadow debug because there's not enough memory inside of an Uno. The next section is dealing with the drive controller settings. So this is setting up what Arduino pins are going to do what for us. So the steering pin is pin 4 on the Arduino. So if you look at a normal Arduino kind of map, you'll see where pin 4 is. It's listed inside the PCB, but this is pin number 4. So that's what actually connects to the servo signal line. We do the same thing for the drive pin, as that drive pin is pin number 3. This connects to the signal line on the electronic speed controller. The other thing we can do is we can define L2 throttle. And so by default, this is uncommented. So L2 is the trigger down at the very bottom of the PS3 Move controller. And this kind of gives you a much more natural way to be able to control the droid, that you use the joystick to be able to turn left and right, but you use the trigger to be able to go forward and back. So if you play video games, this should be relatively easy for you to kind of pick up, because when you're playing a PS3 or a PS4 video game that's a driving game, you normally got the trigger for your throttle. Because the controllers are bigger, you have one for your throttle, one for your brake, and then you use the sticks in order to be able to turn left and right. Well, since we only have one controller, we use the stick to be able to turn left and right, and then the one button does double duty for us. It will allow us to go forward, and it will also allow us to go backward. So to go backward, what you do is you press L1, which is the button right above L2. You press that in, and then you pull the trigger, and that allows you to go in reverse. Depending upon your electronic speed controller, from what I understand, the Traxxas Bandit is definitely going to be configured this way, is that most RC cars will make sure that you have a brake and yet you have to stop before going into reverse. So what that means when you're driving your mouse droid is you'll hit L1 and you'll pull L2, and it's going to bring your mouse droid to a stop. And then when it's stopped, then you can go into reverse. So you'll have to let off of L2 and then hit it again, and so you can go into reverse. That's something that's in the electronic speed controller itself. It's actually a safety thing from an RC car point of view. You just don't want, and also from wear and tear on your actual drivetrain in your RC car. It prevents a lot of wear and tear on that as well. So it's actually a really good thing that it kind of works that way. Just something to be aware of when you work with that. So that's what L2 throttle is. If you comment to this line out by putting in 2 slashes, this will make it so then if you push the joystick forward, the droid will go forward. You pull it back, the droid will go back. And basically L2 is not a used button inside the code. So it's just a different way of steering. I originally didn't have L2 throttle. I learned how to steer my whole mouse droid with just my joystick. But after using L2 throttle, after someone gave me the idea, it actually works out a lot better, so that's why it's the default. So the next part is controlling the sound control settings. This tells you what pins are going to be used for the MP3 trigger transmit pin. So this is used by the SparkFun MP3 trigger and the MD Fly. And so pin 2 is what you would connect to the signal line of either the MD Fly or the SparkFun MP3 trigger. There's also a receive pin. This is set up to be pin 8. Excuse me, the SparkFun MP3 trigger doesn't use it. The MD Fly does in some regards, so pin 8's there. Then there are 2 defines here. So we can say, are we going to use the SparkFun MP3 trigger, or are we going to use the MD Fly MP3 trigger? By default, I choose the MD Fly. The MD Fly MP3 trigger only costs about $10. The SparkFun cost about 50. So from a cost point of view, I imagine most people are going to use the MD Fly. So that's why I set it up as the default. If you do happen to have a SparkFun, I happen to have both. I would comment out one of them, and I can uncomment the other, and now I can use the other MP3 trigger if that's what I have. So that easy to be able to move through them. You just save, hit upload, new software is available on that. Then down below all of this is all stuff that, unless you're a coder, you're not going to have to worry about. That's kind of the end of all the user configurable settings. The rest is actually the code that's actually performing all of the functions and triggering the sounds and all of that throughout the code. So hopefully this will give you enough information so then nothing here is kind of confusing for you as you get started using SHADOW MSE Edition.